A man named Elliot woke up to find that gravity had stopped working in his apartment. His blanket hovered 3 feet above him, his alarm clock spun lazily in the air, and his coffee mug floated upside down, dripping onto the ceiling. Elliot flailed, trying to push himself toward the floor, but his movements only sent him spinning in slow circles. Outside, things looked normal. The street below bustled with people who, unlike him, were still firmly on the ground. Elliot took a deep breath. He needed a plan. He tried swimming through the air, but that just made him tired. He grabbed his belt and used it to hook onto the ceiling fan, pulling himself down until his feet barely touched the floor. Then, the toaster shot past his head. It sailed across the room, narrowly missing the goldfish bowl, which was also floating but miraculously not spilling. Something knocked on his door. Elliot turned, trying to paddle toward the doorknob. After several frustrating minutes of flailing, he managed to pull the door open, only to find his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, standing there, looking unimpressed. "Your ceiling light is leaking," she said, pointing to a small drip of liquid floating toward her apartment. Elliot looked up. His light bulb flickered, and from the socket, tiny drops of golden liquid oozed out, defying physics. Mrs. Patel sighed and stepped inside, completely unfazed by the floating furniture. She reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a remote control with a single red button. Without hesitation, she pressed it. The room jolted. Everything, Elliot included, slammed to the floor at once. His toaster clattered into the sink, his coffee mug shattered, and his goldfish landed safely in its bowl with an indignant plop. Elliot groaned from where he lay sprawled on the floor. "What just happened?" Mrs. Patel tucked the remote back into her purse. "You left your gravity settings on float again." He stared at her. "My what?" She shook her head. "Kids these days, always messing with reality sliders without reading the manual. Just be glad I caught it before the walls started melting. That gets expensive." Elliot sat up, his brain struggling to process her words. "You mean, this is normal? For this building?" "Absolutely. Last week, apartment 4B turned into a desert. We had camels in the hallway for days." Elliot blinked. Mrs. Patel patted his shoulder and turned to leave. "Try not to press random buttons in the future, dear. And if your sink starts singing again, call maintenance." With that, she left, humming to herself as if none of this was remotely unusual. Elliot sat there in stunned silence. Then, as he looked around his chaotic, now grounded apartment, he realized something even stranger. He had no idea where that remote was, or if he had ever pressed it in the first place. Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. What other surprises lay ahead in his unconventional apartment? The adventure was far from over. With a newfound sense of curiosity, Elliot decided to embrace the chaos. Who knew what other realities awaited him in this bizarre building? He grabbed a notepad and started writing down his wild ideas for navigating this new world.